I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed, renewing your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, Christians are often asked to regard Christian practice and Christian theology as somehow opposites and somehow incompatible. It is assumed to be impossible that the theologian can be a practical man, or that practical men can be theologians. Now, the New Testament has a completely different emphasis. It always insists upon the inevitable connection of theology and practice. It insists that all Christian practice must rest on a foundation of Christian doctrine. And it insists also that all Christian doctrine, when correctly held, must lead to Christian conduct and to holy living. And that is not something that can be simply inferred indirectly from the New Testament. It is one of its most distinctive and fundamental emphasis, that holiness comes through the truth, and truth is in order to holiness. Now, the Apostle Paul perhaps is the greatest embodiment of the principle of that connection. And we see that with a special clarity in the Epistle to the Romans. It is an exceedingly logical and profound statement of great Christian doctrines. And yet that statement is full of practical application and of ethical exhortation. And now in the closing part of the epistle, for 5 whole chapters, the apostle is concerned to show us what is the outworking in detail in our own day-to-day lives of those great Christian principles of conduct. And I want this morning to look at this point where the apostle begins his exposition of the Christian ethic. Now, these 2 verses do not contain detailed directives, but they do state very, very clearly perhaps the 3 great basic principles of Christian holiness, or the 3 great imperatives of the Christian ethic. And you'll see very plainly what these 3 are. There is the principle, first of all, that we are to present our bodies a living sacrifice to God. That is the first thing. And then secondly, there is this: be not conformed to this world. And then thirdly, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, that is not detailed ethical application, but that is a great threefold statement of the formative principles of Christian living. And I want to look at them briefly this morning. There is the principle, first of all: I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice. Now if we look at these words in some detail, we find to begin with that this principle is concerned with the human body. In the thought of Paul's generation, the body was held in contempt. It was assumed that matter was evil, and that the body, because it was material, was therefore bound to be sinful. And it was supposed that salvation could only lie in our being delivered from the body, in our being utterly and totally quit of the body. But Paul doesn't hold that. And furthermore, in Paul's day, the generation was characterized by a terrific catalogue of sins that involved the degradation of the human body. It was an age of intemperance, an age of sexual license, an age of fornication and adultery and homosexuality, an age when the body was in practice utterly debased. And Paul is thinking against that great twofold background, a philosophical background in which the body is supposed to be inherently evil, and a practical background where the whole world was given over to physical abandonment and physical license. And Paul is standing over against those tendencies in total repudiation. And he's saying to them, the Christian faith shared the contempt for the body. And the Christian faith cannot condone the abuse of the body. And you see what Paul wants us to do with the body. He wants us to present that body on the altar to God. He wants us to offer it as our Christian service. That service is a special word that means explicitly worship. And we are to offer to God this particular and distinctive act of worship, that we are to present our body on the altar to God. We are to offer it up. Not simply ourselves, not simply our talents, not simply our time, not simply our weekly offerings, not the sacrifice of the Mass, but we are to take our bodies as God has given them to us, and we are to surrender them to God. We are to serve by offering our bodies consciously as an act of worship. Or taken in more detail, as we have Paul teaching us in Romans 6, we are to yield our members instruments of righteousness to God. We are to place our bodies upon the altar. That means in detail that we are to yield the particular members of our body as the instruments of righteousness, that is, as the instruments of God's requirement. All the members. We are to use our hands for God. We are to use our feet for God. We are to use our lips and our tongues for God, our eyes and our ears for God. We are to use our stamina, our physical strength, our powers of coordination and our resilience and every single physical aptitude. We are to yield the whole of that to God. We are to serve Him with our bodies. We are to consecrate all the members of our bodies to God. Or take it further. We are to engage in a great act of renunciation. The moment we place the sacrifice on the altar, that moment it is no longer ours. That moment we are no longer in control. we no longer can determine what uses are to be made with it or of it. Now it is the same in the moment of Christian consecration. We place our bodies on the altar. We yield every member, every aptitude to God, and we renounce the right to dispose of our own bodies. We are not our own. We are bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your bodies. So Paul is saying to us, let us realize that Christian service is not simply something which takes place in the realm of idealism. It is something which takes place in time and in space. It is something which involves the physical, which involves the use of physical power and the use of physical strength and the physical aptitude. And we are therefore asked by the apostle to present our bodies on the altar as an act of worship to God, and to yield our members, each member of our body, as an instrument of the will of God. But then you will see equally clearly that this great principle is concerned with the human mind. It is concerned first and foremost with the body, but it is equally concerned with the human mind. Now, how so? Well, it tells us this: present your bodies as a living sacrifice to God, which is your reasonable service. It is reasonable service. Now, it has become very fashionable today to translate the word reasonable as spiritual. And I cannot understand for the life of me why. Because the word that Paul uses here is the word that we get our own English word logical from. And it is a word that is emphatically concerned with the human mind, with the human reason. And what does the apostle do? He is again instituting a great contrast between the way Christians serve God and the way that others serve God. He is reminding us of that tremendous succession of animal sacrifices that came to God. And those animals were dragged to the altar. They came reluctant, and they came uncomprehendingly. And the apostle is saying to us, let's be careful that we are not dragged into the service of God. Let's be careful that we don't come uncomprehendingly to the service of God, that we don't come as brute beasts. Or there is a second contrast. That is between the commitment of the believer in his worship and the coldness and formalism and externalism that had come to bedevil the whole Judaistic consecration to God. He is saying to us, let's be sure that our minds are in our worship. Let's be sure that we come as reasonable creatures, and that we come to God not only physically, but that we come to God with surrendered and active and participating intelligences in our act of worship. Let us be careful that we pray with the understanding, not simply reciting some form of words, not letting our minds wander while somebody else leads in prayer. Let's be sure that we are praying with the understanding. Let's be sure that we listen to the word with understanding. Let's be sure that at this moment we are making a deliberate effort of concentration against all the odds. And there are tremendously potent factors trying to make us switch off and not listen to the word this morning as at all times. But let's try to make this deliberate effort to listen with the understanding that we give to God a reasonable service. Now let us sing with the understanding. What are we doing? Are we trying to understand what we sing? Are we trying to phrase what we sing as if we understood it? Are we trying to vary our approach to every single one of these psalms according to the meaning of what we are singing? Our singing for some reason is not what it used to be. It has, for some reason, it has lost its verb and lost its speaker. It has lost its tempo. Now, that's just one little detail. We have slowed it down too much. Let us sing with the understanding. Now, there are sad psalms. And let the sad psalms be sung as sad psalms. And then let these great songs of triumph, let them be sung as songs of triumph. Songs of adoration, of wonder, of love and of praise. The presenter cannot, in our situation, control a congregation. He can set an example. But it is a losing battle for one man in our particular tradition. And it depends on the active and intelligent involvement of every single member of the congregation. So let us sing with the understanding. Let us use the minds that God has given us. Let us use them in our prayer. Let us use those minds in our singing. Let us use those minds as we listen to the word. Let us use those minds in every department of Christian service. Let us, for example, give with the understanding. But let us, as we ponder what to put in the collection plate each Lord's Day, let us be sure again that here we are using our understanding. Let us be sure that our commitment bears some intelligent and reasonable relation to the expenditure in which God's church is involved, and bears some relation to the debt that we ourselves as believers and sons of God, the debt that we owe to God. So we are to bring our understanding, our intelligence, into the whole of our worship. So there are these two great principles. We are to yield our bodies to God. We are to yield our minds to God. And there is a third great principle, and it is this: that this verse is concerned with gratitude. It is concerned with the body. It is concerned with the mind. It is concerned too with gratitude. The house, I beseech you, he says, by the mercies of God. Those mercies are pleading with you. You go, he says, into that whole pagan world outside. And every sacrifice they bring is a sacrifice of desperation. The desperate hope that somehow they can earn the favor of God. That's the way it is in paganism. That is the way it is too in Judaism. And that is the way it is in Roman Catholicism. We bring our sacrifice, our mass, our satisfaction and penance, we bring them in order to secure the favor of God. Now, it's not like that in the Christian faith. Of course, there are sacrifices in the Christian faith. The sacrifice of the body, the sacrifice of the mind. But it is never intended by these sacrifices to win the favor of God. And why not? Because such sacrifices are utterly unnecessary. We stand, to begin with, in the favor of God. That is the starting point of the whole operation of our Christian worship. The mercies of God. And we are not drawing near to God to make him mercy. We are drawing near because he has shown us mercy. And because he has saved us. And we come as forgiven and justified. We come as adopted. We come as consecrated. We come as the heirs of God. Now you see constantly the great biblical emphasis on that order. Remember how in Hosea we are told that the church has prayed to God, receive us graciously and love us freely, and then we will render the calves of our lips. And that's where we stand this morning. The Lord has received us graciously. The Lord has loved us freely. And so we render the sacrifice to him. I love the Lord, said the psalmist, because he has heard the voice of my prayers. On the great psalm we sang in the 40th psalm there, remember that tremendous picture of a singing church. He put a new song in my mouth, a song to magnify our God. And why do we sing that song? We sing it because he has taken us from the field of pit and from the miry clay. The Lord of us is mindful being, and he will bless us still. And therefore, not in order to secure us faith, but because he has bestowed his faith, for that reason we bring our sacrifice, we bring our thank offering. And so we have this great first principle: present your bodies living sacrifices in reasonable service, with those three great emphases on the body and on the mind and on gratitude. And then we have this second principle where the apostle tells us, be not conformed to this world. And the great thing there surely is this, that it is negative. It is the most emphatic possible declaration of a principle that the Christian life is to a large extent the practice of saying no. Say no to this world. You negate it. You refuse to be conformed to it. But time and again we find that 8 of the 10 commandments are negatives. Thou shalt not. The Sermon on the Mount, to a large extent, is detailed teaching, is negative teaching. You shall not pray like the Pharisees. You shall not give alms like the hypocrites. You shall not fast to be seen by men. You shall not be anxious. And you shall not judge. And you shall not cast your pearls before swine. Not. Or take again that marvelous picture we saw on Thursday evening of the church at Ephesus, and John's epistle to her through the Apocalypse. And you see how that church held. The Lord praised her. And I might almost say that the Lord praised her for nothing positive. He praised her for her negatives. She couldn't stand the false prophets. And that church hated the works of the Nicolaitans. And you know how fascinatingly contrary to the 20th century thinking that whole picture is. A church commended by the Lord Jesus Christ because it was negative. Because there was teaching it couldn't stand. And because there were works that it hated. And so Christ commends it. Because thou canst not bear those who say they are prophets and they're not. And because thou hatest the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. And so there is a tremendous principle that the church, the Christian ethic, is one of negativism. It is one of separation. It is one of repudiation. It is one, even to follow the Apostle Paul, right into the church in Ephesus, an ethic in which we refuse even to speak about certain things. esteem them unmentionable. And the apostle says then, take that great principle, be not conformed. Let the church be sure that it knows when to say no, that it knows what to hate, that it knows what things are unbearable and insufferable, that it knows what to separate from, and what to repudiate and what to condemn, and that it knows what things are even unmentionable. Let the church be negative. But then, negative in relation to what? In relation, Paul tells us, to this world. Be negative in relation to this world. Be not conformed to this world. Now the word, for a word here, is the word age. Be not conformed to this age, to this isle. And what are the distinctive features of the age that lead the apostle to this tremendous statement? Be not conformed to this age. Well, I suggest there are two things. That this age is obsessed with the temporal, and with the passing, and with the transient. It is itself an age of which Paul can say elsewhere, the fashion of this world is passing away. Those things that are seen and temporal, that are insubstantial, those things that are not durable, this whole age is passing away. And all those who are followers of its fashion are people obsessed with what is passing and what is transient. We saw some of these last Lord's Day. The world's obsession with might, the world's obsession with wealth, the world's obsession with wisdom and with learning. And that surely is the great distinguishing feature of this age. The obsession of its people with things that are not durable. The apostle is saying, now you Christians must on no account be like that. You must not follow the fashion of being obsessed with money, of being obsessed with status, of being obsessed with the world's applause, of being obsessed with the world's prizes, of being obsessed with learning, with prestige, with power. You must not be obsessed with any of these great transient things that the world is so totally committed to. There is the world passing, and obsessed with the fleeting and with the moment. It is soon cut off, and we fly away. It has no continuing sin. And yet you find great intelligent men, and they're building and laying the most terrific foundations for edifices that in such a tremendously short space of time will be no more. There really is nothing that the church today needs more in the light of consummate advertising and sales propaganda than a tremendous dose of a sense of the vanity of this world. To stand in the perspectives of human history and see how inconsequential is my lifespan. To stand before the open grave and realize that that's where it all ends. Naked from the womb, and naked will return to God. Stand in the light of eternity and see the glory of those mighty Old Testament words. The passing swifter than a weaver's shadow. It is soon cut off, and we fly away. Now let us in this world pursue our lawful callings. Let us render to our every earthly master due and meticulously faithful service. Let us be faithful in all the relationships of the life as friends and neighbors and husbands and wives and parents and children, masters and servants and rulers and ruled. But let's not build here we have no continuing city. These may be marvelous words in terms of human style, human effort. It has the point cut home to us that we have here no continuing city. Be not conformed to this world with its obsession with the present and with the past. But again, this world is characterized by iniquity. It is characterized by its obsession with the fleeting and with the passing. It is characterized by its iniquity. It lies in iniquity. It lies in sin. It lies in the evil one, the household. Satan is its prince. And the vast majority of our fellow men are in his hand. In that great biblical statement, led captive by him at his will. Not only the majority, but all those great men who determine policy, decide on direction that society is to take, those who elaborate its foundational intellectual principles, they too are led captive by him at his will. And what kind of world have we? We have a world in which the majority form a moral consensus and create a spiritual climate. We have a world in which an ungodly body of human experts determine policy and set priorities, and again set the particular ethical and spiritual tone of a generation. And what are we to say to ourselves? Well, let's realize this: that in any society where standards are set by the majority, then they are set by Satan. And any society where standards are set by non-Christian experts, then again they are set by Satan. And there is, on biblical grounds, a tremendous presumption that the very air we breathe, morally and spiritually, is satanic. The goals that society sets, the achievements that society recommends, the kind of person whom it supremely rewards, it will show its iniquity in all of these. The standards it sets for the family, and for commerce and industry, and for politics and culture. Again, these will be satanic. In other words, there is a presumption that every place we look, if the standards have been set by the majority and by non-Christian experts, there is a presumption that they're iniquitous. And we are to say to ourselves, I must be on the lookout. Because the way this school is run, the way this hospital is run, the way this factory is run, the way this local corporation, this town council is run, these things have been set by the majority. These things have been set by non-Christian experts. And I must be on my guard, lest I conform simply to the consensus and fail to apply the rigor and stringency of Christian moral and spiritual principles. We have no right to be good fathers by the world's standards, but by the Lord's standards. We have no right to be good workmen by the world's standards, but by the Lord's standards. We have no right to be faithful in any capacity by the world's standards, but only by the Lord's standards. To take that world will take in its wisdom and cunning the Christian ethic. It will take it and dilute it, and yet it looks so Christian. And we have to say to ourselves, let me take these principles in all their stringency, in all their demandingness, and I'll be conformed to them. And I will not be conformed to the majority and the expert consensus. And then there is a third great principle. Be transformed. Oh, present your bodies a living sacrifice. Offer them a living sacrifice. Or again, be not conformed to the world. And thirdly, be transformed. In other words, what is the Christian ethic? What is Christian sanctification? It is this great word here. It is renewal. And it is tremendously radical and thoroughgoing renewal. It is transformation. Now, can I remind you of the associates or associations of that great word? Christ went up to the mount and was transfigured before him. One day Christ will come, and he will transform or transfigure our vile bodies, the bodies of our humiliation. Now it's that great word, transfiguration. Be not conformed to this world, but be transfigured. Be transfigured. And it's as binding as a principle, present your bodies. It's as binding as the principle, be not conformed. It's as binding as anything else of the most elementary kind in the New Testament. Be transfigured. Not simply some mild outward adjustment of manners, but right down into the depths of our being, and into the springs of thought and life and action. There, transfigured. Renewed, the apostle says, in our very minds. Renewed not only in our convictions, but in the very way that we think, in the presuppositions from which our thinking starts, in the directions in which our thinking moves. We are to be transfigured in thought, transfigured in our emotions. We are to rejoice in things that we never rejoiced in before. And we are to fear things we never feared before. And we are to be broken-hearted over things that never troubled us before. We're going to make decisions we never made before. We're going to pursue priorities we never pursued before. We're going to radically adjust not only our style, but in the very depths of our being, transfigured. We have no right to be respectable. We have no right to be honest, upright citizens. We have no right to be average. We certainly have no right to be less. But we are bound to be new, and bound to be as different from the world in which we live as was the glory of Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration. Be transfigured. And transfigured right down in the depths of our being. And you will see again that is a process. Be renewed, be transfigured, and keep on being transfigured. One of the great perils of our Christian situation today, that men are converted and then stagnate. We have some initial or momentary experience, confession, and some great and thrilling sense of assurance. And that's that. We're saved. and we forget it's only the beginning. We forget that there must be no stagnation. We forget that before God we are bound to move, bound to keep on moving in the direction of transfiguration. Nor is it some momentary experience of second blessing, some great moment of Holy Spirit baptism. It is a lifelong experience of growth, a lifelong development of the human soul, by which we are enabled more and more, and more and more and more and more to die in sin and live unto righteousness. Remember how the psalmist tells us, so they from strength unwearied go still forward unto strength, strength to strength, forward, 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 growing in depth and clarity of conviction, growing in the submissiveness of the mind to the great standards of God's word, and to the authority of that word as a great intellectual principle, growing in her joy in God, growing in her sorrow for sin, growing in her fear of God and in her abhorrence of all that is evil, growing in love for the brethren, growing in the longing to see Christ as he is, growing in ardor, growing in zeal and evangelistic zeal, growing in terms of that grace by which men behold the city and weep over, growing in resoluteness, growing in steadfastness, so that not every wind of temptation can blow us off our courses, but growing, more and more from strength to strength. And it's a duty. It's a renewal, it's a process, it's a duty. Be transfigured. It is one of these great unconditional imperatives that God's word gives. Unambiguous, perfectly clear, unintelligible, unqualified. Be transfigured. You attend to it. Everyone that has hope in God purifies himself as God is pure. And how do we do it? Well, Paul tells us in a great word in 2 Corinthians. We all with open face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, are transformed or transfigured into the same image, from glory to glory, as by the Spirit of the Lord.